Okay, we're going to start at the very bottom line of Chaf Zayin Amid Aleph, where we started last week, but just to recap quickly, Chaf Zayin Amid Aleph, the very bottom line, where we started the discussion of whether or not Simonim, in other words, if you give a siman or a Metzia, whether that's Midoraisa or Midrabanan, and that's very important. As the Gemara itself will just explain what is the signal issue here. Now remember that in our Mishnah, going back a few weeks, but we started out by saying Af hasimla. In other words, the Torah told us in Devarim that lo sira es shor achicha sio nidachim. They gave us the whole series of how you should not let your neighbor's animals get lost or be burdened, and then it also says v'afasimla, the garment. So the Gemara in Chaf Zayin went back and forth. Why do we need simla? What does it tell us? So the Mishnah says the simla comes to teach us that anything that has a siman and owners, meaning it's not hefker, is something that you have to call out. You have to try to find the right owner. So if it has simonim, so the potential for identifying it through simonim, or ownership, in other words, someone comes and there's witnesses that say, yes, we know he's the owner, that's the signal importance of simonim. So this question then becomes, so this simonim that we talk about is midoraisa. The obvious answer, of course, is yes, because it's from the pasuk, but let's just go through the Gemara. Iboya lahu, bottom line. Simonim deraisa or rabbanim. Is it deraisa or rabbanim? So my naskemina, top of Chaf Zayin Amid Beis. What is the practical difference whether it's deraisa or rabbanim? So we started off last week by saying lahadura get isha b'simonim. If Ruvain wants to give a get to his wife Leah, and he hires Shimon to be a shaliach. He's living in Chicago. She's living in Eretz Yisrael. So he hires a shaliach to go to Eretz Yisrael to deliver the get. Now, what happens if he loses the get? On the ship somewhere, the get falls out of his pocket. He doesn't have the get. What do we do? So if he can come back and give Simonim and say, you know what? That was the get that I lost. It was in my pocket. And here do I know it's mine because, and he gives Simonim to show that it was his get. Do we believe him? Do we not believe him? What's the practical difference? Says the Gemara, I amrit deraisa. If you say Simonim deraisa, mahadrina, then we say we return it to him because he gave the Simonim, and Simonim is deraisa. So there's no problem because the subject matter of Eishes Ish, of Ishus, is a Torah issue. So the Torah says that if you find that if you have the simonim, if you have the siman, you can do it, no problem. But if you say that to give simonim is only a rabbinic inclusion, the rabbis only made a tikkun over something from deraisa by monetary, meaning the mundane matters. But on matters of Isser and Heter, we call marriage Isser and Heter because here you're going to have a woman who's going to remarry. She may have children. There may be mamzerim. I mean, all these issues are what we call Isurin, not mominous. I lend you $100. You don't want to pay. We have a fight. That's mominous. So you see a major difference. If it's midoraisa, then a lost get can be retrieved and can be used. If it's midrabanan, you have a problem. Says Rashi, lahadura get she'avim min hashaliach hamevi kodim shenasala. It's lost from the hands of the shaliach, and then somewhere along the way he finds it. So if he finds it, the question is, and he gives simonim, do we accept it for purposes of a marriage? The mamona, the hefker bezin hefker, the rabbis included a principle called hefker bezin hefker. They can make something hefker. They can take something that was owned by somebody, make it hefker. That's called tikkun d'Rabbanan. Okay, tikkun d'Rabbanan, but it still deals only with more regular, everyday matters. But when it comes to isurin, you need to have sort of the highest respect for Isurin. Therefore, we would say that it would not be included. So that's the Gemara's analysis. That's where we left off last week. That's the Gemara's analysis of why it matters if it's midoraisa midrabanan. Okay.
Question.
Yeah.
So I realized that we had, I don't know how many months ago, all kinds of issues of what if you have two people with the same name? They found to get the marketplace. It's a busy place, like, an airport, so, whatever. You have all kinds of people coming through, maybe somebody else. But the reality is, duplicate names, particularly, it's Reuven ben Shimon and Leah Bas, whoever, etc. The odds of there being duplicates it's pretty low. A name, the person's name, his wife or ex-wife, as the case may be, which is the whole issue here, name being on there, those are pretty strong simanim. He can certainly get people vouch for who he is, so that yes, this is his name, etc. You put all that together, it seems like a get would be sort of the ultimate example of something that actually has meaningful, useful simanim.
Menashe, the simanim are not the names.
But wouldn't
you don't
those
use the names as the simanim? You've got to find something about the get that he says it's my get.
I know he says, okay, there was a little tear in the upper right-hand corner and a red mark on the, but why don't the simanim count? I mean, unlike almost every other item that we have, where yes, sometimes somebody put their initials on something, whatever. This is something that actually has an identifiable mark.
There's something wrong.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
You're freezing, Menashe, on me.
Can you hear me now? Can anybody else hear me?
Yeah, but you were freezing for a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, I'll try again. So just to sort of restate it, which is that I realize that names and dates and so forth are not what we usually come up with as simanim, because you find a dollar bill in the street, that's not what you're not going to have the person's name on it. So you're saying, oh, it's marked this way or that way or whatever, or it was found in this spot. But again, you open it up and you have sort of the ultimate of simanim. It's not an absolute 100%, because there could be multiple people with the same name in a big city and so forth, but it's pretty strong compared to so many other things. And I'm just wondering why that doesn't enter into it.
And yes, and we discussed that, and we basically came to the conclusion that there probably is nothing that puts a question in jeopardy, particularly when it comes to Isurin, than an Eshes Ish. In other words, a married woman who needs to get a divorce, it has to be so scrupulously and carefully done, step by step. We talked about chain of command, we talked about all of those other things, so that the height of responsibility is required in order for that get to be considered valid. So if there's even a small chink in the armor, and look, as a practical matter, we've said many a time how many Reuven Ben Yaakov, Leah Ben Yitzchak are there that you could worry about. But we all saw this from the Gemara, that there was one man Amar who said, even if I have no knowledge of a comparable set of people in any known place that is known on the face of the earth, we still have to be concerned, because there may be some place that we don't know and they exist, and all of a sudden the get is suspect. Now, there's not even a percentage you can probably, infinity. I mean, there's not a percentage you can put on that to say that that's what happened here. We're sitting here and you're worried about an exchange of a get from a place, beyond Timbuktu. Nevertheless, that's not the point. The point is that if there's any reisa, if there's even the slightest question or doubt on Isurin, we are machmir. That's what the point of this is. So it sounds almost beyond rationality, but the Torah is telling us that rationality doesn't come into place when it comes to Isurin. That's how we have to understand what the Gemara is telling us. Otherwise, you play the odds or you play the likelihood, especially when it's 99.999 to 1. But still, Isurin, Mamzerus, these other questions have to be 100% certain. If you can get 100% certainty, which again, Reuven gives a get to Leah, he delivers it. There is no break in the action. There's no break in the chain of command. So rationally speaking, you're right, Menashe. I mean, there's no
Right,
rhyme or
right.
reason why this question should come up here and we should have this problem. But again, the Gemara is going to the nth degree to tell you how much the Torah values the sanctity and certainty, I should say, sanctity and certainty of Isurin, of matters of Isser and Heter, so as not to break that. And we see that in halacha from the different halachas that the Bezdin, for instance, was supposed to mete out punishment and all this other, and we see that how careful the Torah crafted the requirements for an Isser or for punishment or for things like that, that you could say, and we do say, it's not practically going to happen. It just can't happen. If you're telling me that these are the requirements, basically, you're telling me it will never happen. And the Torah tells us in some cases, the Makoshi Shechin, it didn't happen. It was a story to illustrate what could happen if someone is ill Shabbos. A Ben Sora More. Ben Sora More can virtually not happen. By definition, it can't happen. So, but yet you come before the Bezdin, they say this is what happened, and then they find a fallacy in one of the issues and say no, it's not a Ben Sora Mora. So while we think rationally, we want to have rational answers to questions, there are some things that rationally it tests the rationality. Yes, it tests your ability to say that there's even a likelihood or probability of a infinitesimal percentage that something can happen. But that's how far the Torah wants to tell us we go with respect to Isurin, that which is why, as from our standpoint, if it's midoraisa, then there's the possibility of saying yes, we can accept it. But if you say simonim and drabanan, and someone lost a get, and he comes back and gives you an ironclad siman, no question about it, can't accept it. It's midrabanan, and the rabbis cannot include an iser deraisa in their thinking. So that's what really this is all about. It's about understanding the depths of what the Torah wants from us with regard to halacha, and then as a practical matter, we're looking in and we want to see, what happened here. Now we're going to see in a minute an important stira on this, because we're saying that if it was midoraisa and he was able to make it clear that he knew what the get was, then even if he lost it, it's okay. The Rashi will quote the Gemara in Gittin, where we say that that's not okay. So we're going to get to that in a minute. It's a stira. Our Gemara is a stira with the Gemara in Gittin, and we're going to understand how we answer it. But in any event, so that's the question. Is it Deraisa Rabbanan? And here's the reason why it's important to know if it's Deraisa Rabbanan. Comes the Gemara and says Tashma, fourth line. Tashma, come in here. I'm going to give you a proof. Our Mishnah, Afasim lo haisa b'chlal kol elu. The Torah says lo savod, and it says also Simla. So Simla was specifically selected out. Why was Simla selected out? And which we said in the Mishnah there, to compare Simla is a unusual sort of creature, if you will. It has simonim. You can give simonim on a shirt or on a pair of pants or whatever, and it has owners. Chayiv lahachriz. It's not hefker, so you have to return it. Af kol dover sheyesh lo simonim. Anything that has the potential to be identified through simonim, yesh lo tovim, chayiv lahachriz. So the answer to the question is, of course, it makes a difference, because we see that the Mishnah tells us that with the Simla, if you have simonim, you have to return it. And what is that? That's Minat Torah. So you see, again, the question is Simla midaraisa midrabanan? The answer is, of course, it's Doraisa. It's the pasuk that says that Af hasimla hoisa b'chlal kol elu, that we say Shavas Haveda, and we talk about generic, and then we talk about a shor, a ser, a chamor, and then we talk about a Simla. And we define Simla as something that has simonim. So you see from the pasuk in the Torah that simonim is midoraisa. So that's the proof he wants to give, just straightforward from our Mishnah to say that of course Simonim are D'Oraisa, and therefore you can use them for Isurin. Now, so okay, Rashi, Tovin Itzbechale, Kro, Tovin also Lemute, Mide de Yish, Efgera. So, in other words, Tovin means that there are owners to exclude Hefker and Yish, which we said in the Mishnah. That's the reason why a garment stands as a model for returning, because it has owners. It means it's not Hefker, and no one was Meyayish, and it has Simonim that you can identify. Okay, so that's where we are now, and it's a beautiful commentary to tell us Simonim is Midoraisa. Says the Gemara, not so fast. You want to tell me that because it says Simla requires Simonim and Tovin, Tana Tovin it's B'chalei. Simonim Kidei Nesacha. What do you mean Simonim is Doraisa? No. Tovin, witnesses are Midoraisa. Midoraisa, you need to have witnesses in order to identify something. Simonim Kidei Nesacha. That's Agavorcha. That's really Midorabanan. You don't need Simonim Midoraisa. So in other words, the answer here is don't jump so fast to the conclusion that when the Mishnah says that Simla is the model for Simonim Doraisa, it's not true. Really, what it is a model for is that you have to have witnesses Midoraisa. So Tovin is Midoraisa, but Simonim, no, that can be Midrabanan. So in other words, the Gemara wants to put a wedge between witnesses and. Now, there's no proof of that, by the way, from the language of the Torah. The Torah says Simla, and then it says Simonim and Tovin. So from the Torah alone, we wouldn't know. But it comes the Meforshim and say that's what it means. So again, they want to answer the question that it's not a raya. This whole Gemara is going to be about, do we have a proof that Simonim is Midoraisa Midorabanan? We thought perfect proof it's Midoraisa, because the Torah says by Simla that you have to have Simonim and witnesses. Answer, witnesses, yes. Simonim, no. That's simply the answer of the Gemara. Kidei Nesava, below Mikra, Rashi, fourth line down. Ella asmachin, it's an asmachta. Akra ba'alma, it's an asmachta. Basically, it's an appendage to what the real truth is, that witnesses are midoraisa, and that's a simon. Yeah, we can use a simon too, but that's not the raisa. That's the rabban. Again, you can argue where they get that from, but that's the clear. That's what they're trying to say. The Torah is saying. So essentially, we accept that as a distinction, and we say it's no proof from that pasuk in the Torah about simla. Says the Gemara Vayter. Okay, if I don't have a proof from there, Toshma, come and listen. What was the next thing that the Mishnah told us? Chamor b'simone ukuf. Remember, we said that what's the chiddush of chamor in that pasuk when the Torah says that it singles out chamor as one of the things that you have to return. It comes to tell us that if you give simonim on the saddle, not on the chamor, but simonim on the saddle, that's enough for you to have to return the chamor. So you're going to say the saddle had a design, it had this, it had that. Okay, and that's also from that pasuk in the Torah. So the Chayra, now we see another raya that Simonim are midoraisa from the Torah because of Chamor. And for the Gemara, no. Emo be'ede ukaf. Same teretz. No, we're not talking about Simonim. We're talking about Edim, that there were witnesses on the ukaf. Not that he came and say, oh, there was a red mark or a scratch, or there was this, that, the other, which would prove Simonim. Not at all. We're talking about Ede ukaf. There were witnesses to the ukaf. And from those witnesses, we extrapolate that you have to return the chamor. So it's basically using the same principle that we just did with Simla and applying it to chamor. and saying that we're splitting up simonim from witnesses. Witnesses are midoraisa, simonim are not midoraisa. So now we're left with the same question. What is it? Because we just scratched two of our big proofs, Simla and Chamor. What do? Says the Gemara Vayter. No, I don't give up. I'm going to give you another example. What is that? Toshama. The Torah says in that very same set of psukim, what does it say? You have to take it into your house and you have to wait for your brother to come claim it. So if you found something which we have discussed in the past, and that something can become damaged or destroyed, you have a responsibility to take it into your house. If it's inanimate, it doesn't cost you anything. If it's adamant, you have to feed it, you have to feed it. But the fact of the matter is we have such an obligation. So Frek the Gemara, does it enter your mind? This is a prelude to what we're going to say. Does it enter your mind that when it says Adrosh Achicha, that you would give it to your friend before he asked for it? In other words, you found it, you have to wait for someone to come and claim it. You don't go ahead and say, Yankel, I'm giving you this, I found this thing, here it is. Why would you give it to him? He didn't claim it yet. So no, El Dorashu, but you do an investigation. Im Ramai who or Aina Ramai, is he honest or is he not honest? So if you find out from his past, from his colleagues, from his history that he's straight, he's not a Ramai, not a cheater, then if he claims it, you give it to him. That's what the Gemara is saying is what the Torah is telling us. The Torah is telling us that if someone comes to claim, you have to do a background check to make sure he's not a Ramai. Okay, says the Gemara, my lav misimanim. Don't you think that you would give it to this guy who has now been determined not to be a cheater? You give it to him with simanim. In other words, he says, oh, it had a red mark in the corner and then it had a rip and whatever. And for the Gemara, lo be'edim. No, be'edim. So the Gemara again is consistent and telling us with every turn that when we say simonim and edim, our focus is on edim. That edim is what is allowing us to return it to the fellow, not simonim. So all your constant harangue that simonim is deraisa falls on deaf ears because it's not simonim. It's edim that is ultimately going to be the reason why we give it to him, not simonim. So again, we're left at an impasse because we don't know what to do. So take a look at Rashi. Rashi before Tashma el chamor l'simoni ukufu. We talked about a chamor. Ema be'edei ukuf. Im yesh edim hamakirim b'tvias ayin l'ukuf shehu shalo. If there are witnesses who recognize that this is the saddle he used, machzirin lo es hachamor. I remember growing up as a kid, we used to watch these cowboy westerns, and you had I don't know, the Lone Ranger, whoever it was, and they had all kinds of special gadgets on their saddlebag and everything else that made it look really fancy. So you have an eyewitness who says, of course it belongs to him. That saddlebag was just absolutely studded with diamonds and stones and everything else. That's the right. So he wants to say that it's edim, not simonim, that is mid'oraisa. So it would be slug up every proof by saying it's not simonim. Okay.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Joshu v'hachi mashma ad rosh achicha also ad rosh achicha until we don't mean that we give it to the first guy we see. It means that your brother has to come and has to claim it. The edim shiyova edim shehu shalom, and then he has to bring witnesses that it's his, right?
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Stuart just came on the group here.
I'm sorry, Jay, go.
Stuart just signed in. Do you have any?
Udal bat Rachel
Udal bat Rachel
and Eliyahu Chaim Zvi ben Milka.
Elio Chaim Tzvi ben Milka.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Okay,
Rishus Shlomo.
welcome to Galut.
Okay, so once again, we're foiled in that we don't have any proof that simonim are doraisa, and that's again what the whole focus is. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to tell us something very interesting. We've just tried on a number of occasions to prove that it is doraisa, that simonim are doraisa. We gave one proof after another that simonim are doraisa. Now, the Gemara is going to flip-flop. And the Gemara says, if I can't prove simonim are doraisa, I'm going to try to prove that simonim are drabanan. The other way around. Simonim are drabanan, not doraisa. Okay, how? Toshma. Come, here's a proof. Forget about it. It has nothing to do with our Mishnah, with our Pasuk, something entirely different. When you have to identify a mess in order to say that this person has died, then the identification process requires someone to look at the face and at the nose, meaning the entire face. You can't just look at a forehead or a cheek or a chin and say, yeah, Nabak, that's, Yassel or whatever. You've got to look at the face, which includes the nose, which means the entire front of the face. That's how you identify a mess. Okay, fine. Wait a minute. We have simonim. He was in the war. He had a huge wound that went from his under his right to all the way down to his left. That's a simon. What are you telling me that I can't identify him unless I look at his face and his full face? What about simonim or Kalov? You bring him in and he's got his trademark I don't know, Davy Crockett jacket on, or he's got something with his name on it, on the lapel. So there are other ways of identifying a mess. Why does the Gemara tell us it has to be the face, the full face? Right? Shema mina simonim lav d'oraisa. Now, to be sure, identifying a dead person is an easy. It's from the Yisurin. It's not luminous. In other words, it's a davar. Again, you're identifying a person with the possibility that you may make his wife an almana so she can remarry. So all of these are Yisurin, no question about it. And yet we say that you have to identify the face. You can't use simonim. Isn't that a proof that simonim is not midoraisa? Because if it was midoraisa, you could surely use it. So now the Gemara wants to flip-flop and say, I'm going to give you a great proof that it can't be doraisa, because you have to use a certain kind of view, and you're not allowed to use simonim, which are different than what we just said they are. I mean, a facial recognition is also a simon, but if it's miyucha just to the face, it's to the exclusion of all other simonim, then you can't say simonim adoraisa. Right?
What happens if the face is totally mutilated, decapitated?
Right. So that's a good question. So if the face is totally mutilated, then you have to use other forms of
So
simonim. That's a good point. But lechatchila,
Yeah.
what's that?
No, I've said in that case, if somebody said, well, yes, he had a cut down from his left side to his right side.
Right. But that's only a b'diavad. That's a b'diavad. That's a last case scenario, not a first case scenario. First case scenario, you have to identify the face, which at least comes to tell us that that's the ultimate simon. If that's the ultimate simon, how do I know simonim are d'oraisa? I don't know that simonim are d'oraisa, because if I'm told no, you must use a facial recognition. So that's the Gemara's kasha. The Gemara's kasha is if simonim require facial recognition to the exclusion of other simonim, how do I know it's d'oraisa? B'diavad, we come to other things. But so the Gemara says, Omrei gufe de'orach v'guds. No, really simonim. So the Gemara now we're going to go into the shakla v'tar. So the Gemara says, no, really simonim are d'oraisa. The reason why it's not deraisa here is because the guy's coming to testify if he was tall or short. Tall or short isn't a siman. In other words, I would accept simonim, but not he's tall or he's short. I mean, millions of people are tall and short. So, in other words, the Gemara wants to find a way to undo the proof by saying, really, simonim are deraisa, but the reason why it's not here is because the simon he was bringing was tall or short. And that doesn't work. Rashi says, Ein me'idin al adam shemes. We can't testify on a person that he died, lahases ishto, to allow his wife to remarry, ela imkein ro'u parts of ponav shuhu am achote, unless you identify through facial recognition. That was, and then we said, wait a minute, that's not true. Simonim are okay, but here the orok ugut she'ein zeh siman shehar be'aruchim beguzim yesh. You can't tell me that the simon here is he was tall or short. There are millions of people who are tall and short. That's the reason why simonim isn't good. But otherwise, simonim is good. Again, the Gemara is trying to undo the point. The point is that we're saying that simonim are midrabanan. That's not true. You can use simonim. The reason why you can't use it here is because he didn't give you a good simon. He gave you tall and short. And says the Gemara, no. The chashinim l'she'ela. We're concerned that maybe he borrowed. Again, this is not so much in the case of a scratch on the belly. We're talking chashin and kelov, says Rashi, begadav chashin and shema hashilan la'acher va'osa acher ro'u shemes. So in other words, if we relied on kalim, which would also be technically simonim, you might get the wrong idea because this fellow changed uniforms with his fellow soldier. And then the other guy was killed wearing this fellow's uniform. And you're going to say, yeah, Nebuch Yitzchak was killed. It's got his name, he's got his dog tags, and he's got his uniform on. Teretz says it wasn't even his uniform. He borrowed it from somebody else and he was wearing it. So it's no proof that he is the one who died. So again, what the Gemara is trying to tell us is that you can't use these kinds of factors because it's prone to making a mistake. So he says, Chashinan, the She'ela, we're afraid that he borrowed it. And if he borrowed it, then it's a mistake. And you're going to say that he died, and you're going to allow a woman to become a woman who can remarry on the basis of a false identification. Again, the Gemara is going out into left field a little bit in giving us these terutzim. But remember what I said, by Yisurin, by matters of Isur and Heter, the Gemara will make it so airtight that you can't have any remote possibility that it's not accurate. Not so by Mominus, but yes by Yisurin. Frek the Gemara, Ichashin l'sheila, if we're afraid of borrowing, Chamor b'simone ukaf, Hecha mahadrinan. Then how about by Chamor, where we said with Simonim of Ukaf? The Gemara said Simone Ukaf. And he's taking the position that Simonim are midoraisa. He's saying Simone Ukaf Hecha mahadrinan. How could you return with Simonim? Maybe he borrowed the saddle. Maybe this guy didn't own a saddle, and he borrowed a saddle, and you recognize that saddle and think, oh, wait a minute, yeah, you got to return the chamor to so-and-so because that's the saddle. It was never his saddle. It belonged to somebody else. So how can you, on that identification, give it to this fellow if maybe he borrowed the saddle? Again, what's the point of this Gemara? The Gemara is saying, if you're afraid of borrowing, take that to the nth degree again, and saying then we should always be afraid that something can be borrowed and it won't identify the real owner. So how can we say we return something, a chamor, on the basis of an ukaf? Well, it wasn't even his ukaf. It wasn't his saddle. He borrowed it from somebody else. And for the Gemara, ukaf lo shu'ula insha, a person does not, again, we're saying this as a matter of fact, but a person doesn't lend out his saddle because it irritates the chamor. In other words, the chamor gets irritated if it uses someone else's saddle. It uses the saddle that it breaks in, and that belongs to this fellow. If he's going to borrow a saddle, that's going to cause irritation on the chamor, and he wouldn't do it. That's the Gemara's teretz. So therefore, you can't ask a kasha about borrowing against an ukaf because it doesn't happen. Okay, so again, so we're back to square one. What is square one? That we're according to this, we're saying that it's not midoraisa, it's midrabanan, but yet we give all these excuses here why it can't work, either because it's borrowed or because in the case of Misa, it wasn't given the right, he wasn't given the right testimony. So where are we? We're kind of, again, we're not clear ultimately whether Shimonim are midoraisa or midrabanan. Says the Gemara Vayter, the Tanya, we learned in this brisa, motzo kosher bikis or ba'arnika u'b'tabas or shenimtzu ben kelav afilu zman meruba kosher. This case of get that we started with, Ruvain gives Shimon a get to go overseas and give it to his wife later. Fine. He is supposed to deliver it. He loses it temporarily, and then he finds it. Question, is the get a good get? So let's quickly look at Rashi. Motzer kosher bekish shalo o ba'arniki shaliach hamevi get v'ovad haimenu la'achazman v'ovad ben la'achazman motzer kosher bekish shalo o ba'arniki, and he starts searching, and all of a sudden he finds the get that was tied to his wallet or to his purse or to something else, or ben kelav kli tashmisha shebebeso, he finds it right next to his trunk with all of his clothes buried deep in the trunk. Afilu lizman meruba, says the Gemara. Now here's the point. Afal gav the Tanan. We learned in the Mishnah in Gittin. Maybe get v'ovad haimenu. The Mishnah there says, if a person brings a get from overseas and he loses it, matzel is man meruba posel. If he finds it right away, it's okay. If he doesn't find it, let's say for a week or a month, it's posel. Here, kosher. Why is it kosher? Why is our case different than the case in Gittin where time is against you for making a get posel? The answer is kosher. So the answer is because he has a siman. What's the siman? The siman is that it's tied to his wallet. In other words, he took the get, and for safekeeping, he wound it around his purse or something that belonged to him. So when he lost it, and then it was found together with his clothing or with his items. So that's the siman. So l'chayra, the siman works, and it works for what? For a get, which is isurin. So you see here we have a proof that it is midoraisa because of that brisa that says that if you find a get and the get is tied to something that's clearly his, that it belongs to him. Therefore, it's okay. Fact the Gemara. So am I kosher? Nechish l'sheila. Why do we say it's kosher? Let's say it was borrowed. Okay, we're saying that a borrowed item it creates a false positive, and therefore you're not allowed to use it because, after all, you can't bring a raya. Maybe he borrowed it, so you can't bring a raya. So let's say over here that he borrowed it and he tied it around. In other words, it's not really the same get. It's a get from somebody else, and he tied it around. He came to the guy and said, "You know what? I need a handkerchief. I need a purse. I need something." So he lent him his purse, and then this other fellow, not this shaliach, another somebody else, tied his get to that purse. Right? It can happen. Maybe not logical, but it can happen. So again, if we're so scrupulously careful by Yisurin, why aren't we afraid in any case nichesh l'sheila? So why does this brisa say that even after Zman Meruba, you're allowed to deliver the get? Because it was tied to something that's personal to him. Therefore, it's a raya, it's a siman that it's his, nichesh l'sheila. And for the Gemara, Omre kis va'arnik v'tabas lo mishalish inshe, just like we said by the saddle, a person does not lend his purse or his wallet or his tabas. That's a signet ring. That was the third item. So it was a signet ring that the get was tied to. A person doesn't lend these out. So he says, why? So kiss and arnika in the Samna says Rashi menachshe v'om simin la'adam shemash l'kiso shemochalo mazla. It's more superstition that a person doesn't lend out his wallet because he's superstitious that his money will be lost or whatever the case may be. So a person doesn't lend it out. The tabas and a signet ring b'shum de mezayev. In other words, everybody owned a ring that had his initials, like a signet, and that was his signature. He used to take the ring and press it on the document. Says Rashi, Shahaya l'chol ish chosim nikeh b'tabato, u'k'sheshalech shum dava sosum machseu b'chosma b'tabato. So he always used to use it to sign his letters. Lefikach ena mashal tabato. You don't lend out your signet ring. Shema yaseh chosim. He'll make a forgery. Can you get chosma v'yazif bo as shlu chosa? He'll forge the signet and then he'll use it to send out forged letters. Anyway, what's the point? The point is that these are all items that a person would not lend out. So if your concern is that it was a borrowed item, you're not concerned. So therefore, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that if you find a get tied to these items, you can rely on the get and you can say that it is acceptable, and therefore, even after Zman Meruba, you're allowed to return it. So l'chayra, we might have a proof from here that simonim are deraisa. Not 100% clear because there's some question, but again, in the construction of this Gemara, the Gemara wants to go back and forth and find proofs and then undo the proofs. So l'chayra here, this proof might be a valid proof because you can say that a person over the period of time, even if the get is lost, we will accept the siman that it was tied to the arnik. Okay, so that's our Gemara, which is the discussion of Amaroim as to whether or not siman is midaraisa midrabanan. Says the Gemara, first wide line. You know what? Why are we wrestling over this question as to whether or not the Amoraim are questioning whether it's a siman is a deraisa rabbanon? Lema katanoi. Let's just say this is a machlokes tanoim. This same machlokes that we're trying to grapple with here was a machlokes between tanoim many years ago. Why? There's a machlokes between the Tanakama and Elazar ben Mahavi. Ein me'idin ala shuma. Tanakama says that you can't testify. In other words, if you have a mess, if you have a person who died, and you want to be able to testify whether or not this is that person, so we say that you testify on whether or not he had a identifying mark on the corpse. Let's say he had a they say it was a blemish or something on the body, but something very distinctive on the body that would identify this individual. So there's a machlokes tanoim, it's a Tanakama who says ein ma'idin ala shuma, that you cannot identify a mess from a shuma. The Elazar ben Mahavi omer me'idin ala shuma, that you can be made. Now, remember we said before that l'chatchila you have to identify only from the parts from the face. So right. So then, David, you asked a good question. What happens if his face was obliterated and you cannot identify the face? Does that mean you can't identify a dead body? The answer is no. So b'di'evet, you could use a siman on the body, b'di'evet, but not l'chatchila. So we want to go with the best case scenario. That's what we said. But so the machlokes tanoim was, can you identify him with a mark on the body? Tanakama says, no, you can't, which means Simonim is not Midoraisa. That you can testify on the Shuma. So let's look at Rashi. Rashi says, Me'idin ala Shuma, ha'me'idin al ha'isha lahasiya ramasimin ha'yabo Shuma be'ever ploni. In other words, we're going to let this woman remarry because we're going to say, yes, that's definitely Yankel who died. Why? Because he had this pimple or this terrible mark on his right thigh, the Aver Ploni, on such and such an Aver. So you look at the right thigh, and lo and behold, he's got this exact mark that's being described. So we say it's okay. What does that mean? That means Siman is Deraisa, because you're allowing her to remarry. So says the Gemara, this machlokes that we're having here in our Gemara about whether or not Siman Deraisa Rabbanan, the Tanoim, a couple of 100 years before us, had this same machlokes. So let's look at their discussion. Why are we having our discussion here a couple of 100 years later? Remember that the earlier the learning, the greater the principle of acceptance. In other words, something that Tanoim discussed has greater relevance or greater impact than if the Amaroim discussed it later on. So here we have a whole Gemara and a half a daf discussing a couple of Amaroim who are arguing, wait a minute, let's go to the source. The Tanoim argued about the same point. Zak the Gemara Azah. My life behind kamiflically isn't the source of the machlokes Tanakama and Elazar ben Mahavai as follows. Tanakama sabah siman d'Rabbanan. Tanakama says simonim are midrabanan, and therefore you can't accept it. Elazar ben Mahavai sabah simonim d'Oraisa. Isn't that exactly what we're talking about in our Gemara? A machlokes Rabbanan d'Oraisa. Very simple. The Rabbanan says you can't accept it, and Elazar ben Mahavai says you can. Omar Rava, no, not so simple. You can't simply divide it into a machlokes of whether it's d'Oraisa or Rabbanan. The kula almo simonim d'Oraisa. Even the rabbis will hold that simonim are d'Oraisa. So don't tell me that that's the machlokes. What's the machlokes? The question is, can this particular blemish or mark on the body be replicated in another body? In other words, is this such an unusual mark that he's one of a kind? And therefore, when you find him, you're 100% certain it's him. It's got to be Yankel, because no one else has a mark like that. So that's the shaila. Mar Sava, the Tanakama says, Shuma Mitzuya ben Gilui, that no, I can't accept the fact that another person can't also have this unusual mark on the back of his thigh. I can't accept that.
Schottenstein translates the word as a wart.
A wart, yeah. In other words, it's some blemish on the body that someone else can have the same thing, right? A wart is a wart. A blemish is a blemish. So Umar Saba Shuma Enimitsuba ben Gilui. And Elazar ben Mahavai says, no, you can't replicate it. So in other words, the Gemara wants to find a way to say, really, it's midoraisa. In other words, let's give proof to prove. Simen is midoraisa. But here you can't come to grips with it because you're not sure whether or not it's really him. Or Iboyus Ema, another possibility. What is that? Everybody agrees, even the Tanakama, that a wart is a wart and it doesn't replicate itself somewhere else. Here the question is, there is a discussion, I guess it's scientific, whether a person who has certain warts or marks on his body, and after he dies, do they change color? So it must have been that they saw that after a person dies, something can turn from black to white. In other words, The Vengiloi had nolad b'shato shenolad b'mazal er. The simonim are asuin ba masin l'shtanis. If they change, or einan asuin l'shtanis, they don't change. In b'chayav hoysa shuma shchora. If in life Rashi here, it was a dark one. But most are nasas levena or ipa. In other words, maybe scientifically, or maybe they saw that was a possibility. So the machlokes here is certainly simonim are d'oraisa. Tanna Kama isn't going to argue. The problem here is this particular wart or this particular blemish something that can change colors? That they can change colors, therefore you can't rely on them. And Elazar ben Mahavai says, no, it doesn't change. Therefore, you can rely on it. So again, the machlokes tanoim is whether or not a simonim can be relied on for a completely different reason, because they either change color or someone else will have the same siman or something. Says the Gemara, no. Okay, we're gonna come to a conclusion. A wart does not change colors after misa. Simonim derabanan, but really simonim are derabanan, not deraisa. So now this machlokes of the Tanoim wants to say it's a simonim are not deraisa. What is our discussion? Here we're talking about whether a siman muvak means something that is so indisputable that no one can argue and say that it is other than that. So in other words, the machlokes between the Tanoim is as follows. Mar Sovar Shuma Siman Muvaku. According to Elazar ben Achai, it's a Siman Muvik. And the Tanna Kama says Shuma Lav Siman Muvaku, that it is not Siman Muvik. So this is a little bit of a chiddush that this Gemara is teaching us. That what is the chiddush? The chiddush is that besides normal, Simonim is the Rabbanan. There's not going to be a machlokes here. And they're going to say simonim is Rabbanan, not the Raisa. But here we are talking about such a mark that it defies one saying that someone else can have the mark. In other words, it's so unusual that it allows one to say, you know what, this is definitely Yankel, and even in the Surin, we're going to allow his wife to remarry. So this is a tremendous chiddush the Gemara is telling us, because if you say simonim is derabanan, a wife is you can't rely on Eishes Ish. How could you rely that a woman should remarry on a derabanan? We said that from the very beginning. That's the problem. The problem is if simonim is derabanan, it's a takanta. It doesn't work for Isurin. And for the Gemara here, just a very unusual answer, that simonim is the Rabbanan. You're right. Normally, you cannot rely on simonim, and simonim would not allow a woman to remarry. But we're talking about something called siman muvuk. And muvuk means, in its clear language, it's uncontested. It's muvuk. It's completely uncontested. So if it's uncontested and there's no chance that you can mistake it, that's the machlokes. So according to the Tanna Kama, no, it's still the Rabbanan, and I'm not going to allow it. And according to Elazar ben Mahavai, you know what? This supersedes even simonim. So even if simonim are mid Rabbanan, I'm going to allow this woman to remarry on the basis of this siman muvah. That's a chiddush.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
It seems to me that a wart is something that the body manufactures. There are other simonim that you have a cut or somebody, it's man-made versus body-derived. So
Right.
They don't seem to differentiate between the two. If it's body-derived, the likelihood of another body having the same body generated simon at the same place would be such a low probability that it couldn't happen. I mean, based on the way the logic is flowing here,
Right.
a cut or a scar or something like that. Everybody could have scars and this and that.
So here he would not mean a scar or a cut that someone else could possibly have duplicated in life. He means when he says a wart, he must mean some growth or something on the body that makes it. Let's take a look at Rashi. I mean, we've grappled with this all morning, and Menashe asked this question, and so did David. I mean, everybody's been asking this question: is so if it's a siman, and you're saying that this is the proof, then that's the proof. So again, that I can understand. But if you're going to come to a conclusion that really simonim are not midaraisa, which is what this Gemara concludes, simonim is not doraisa. If it's not doraisa, forget about it. You shouldn't use it. But something extra on top of that called siman muvhek, Rashi va'afili simonim derabanan yesh lishmach al zeh. So this is a tremendous chiddush because it's a what do we want to call that? A super siman. You got simonim and then you got super simonim. So a siman, if it's not the raisa, forget about it. But a super siman, a muvhek, afilu, says Rashi, afilu simonim derabanan yesh lishmach al zeh. Even if you hold simonim ad rabbanan and it's not allowed on isurin, yesh lishmach al zeh, you can hang your hat on this, that this is allowed because it's a super siman, and it's impossible. Again, how we get to that is a little bit strange. It's impossible that you can make a mistake and say that it's not Yankel, and therefore his wife is not an Ashes and she can marry. I mean, that's what strains us a little bit here, because we've been talking all morning about simonim and about the airtight, the need for an airtight, completely infallible situation. And here the Gemara is telling us that there's something called siman muvik, and a siman muvik is a super siman, and therefore it defies all the explanations on simonim. It's a chiddush. I have to tell you, it's a chiddush. It's not something that we would easily accept based on our entire learning. Our entire learning was based on the principle that if there's even a what do we call it, a smidgen of possibility, that we don't allow it to happen. And here we're allowing it to happen.
So, Rabbi, here's a modern application. We were told by a rabbi who participated in the 9/11 identifications.
Yeah.
But they came to a point where they decided they had to use DNA to identify bodies that were destroyed, burned, or whatever beyond recognition.
Right.
And they had a debate with the Israeli rabbis because some of the victims were Israeli. The Israeli rabbis did not want to accept DNA as an identification, but we persuaded them that they had to. That was the only way to do it. DNA, which is, if you want to say it's 99.9, but not perfect, because it is possible to have a mistake on DNA. They did find.
So we want to say that that's a siman muvik.
Yeah. That would be a super siman, I guess, in your
right.
term. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, no, you're 100% right. But and in fact, that's what they did, right? They relied on it. They relied on it. So this is the chiddush that simonim are midrabanan according to this machlekes Tanakama. That's stam simonim, but the only siman that's accepted is a siman muvhek. Is something that is I guess is so definitive that one can't wiggle around and say that it's not. But that again, when you finish learning the entire Gemara and come up with this conclusion, it sort of begs the question a little bit, because we've been preparing ourselves this entire time to say it's got to be deraisa, and now we say it doesn't got to be deraisa; it can be derabanan. Okay, so we're going to pick this up, Misham, next week. And we're not finished with it because there still are some questions here, but at least we've come to a conclusion that the machlokes Tanoim surrounds the question of siman muvik, and even if it's drabanan, siman muvik allows you to identify disqualify the possibility of Eshes Ish and allows a woman to remarry. So that's how we're going to leave it. Mitzvah, we'll pick up from there on the subject.
Shkoyach.
Yeah, again, and like you say, David, this is Lamaisa. I mean, this is Lamaisa because we have this event, unfortunately, and you know, anytime you have, I guess, a very serious car crash or something where the bodies are burnt beyond recognition, then the question of identification comes into being, and the question is, what can you rely on? Because you don't have anything but maybe some kind of a simon. Now, if all they found was like a shard of clothing or someone's wallet or something, or like a little piece of a driver's license or who knows what that had a name or a partial name, and they could say that was definitely so and so. Is that a simon? Is that a simon muvik, or do you have to have just like you say DNA, which is the body itself? I don't know. I mean, I'm speculating. How far does this go that you can identify through a simon and say this is a simon muvik?
How about through teeth?
Through teeth, yeah, no, they usually dental records but yeah, those are more definitive, right? No, I agree. But the question is, how far do simonim go in order to allow a woman not to be in a guna that she can remarry? And again, we try to be within the halacha. We try to be as careful and as lenient, but still toe the line, so to speak, right? We don't want to, just make it impossible or possible without suspecting, because there have unfortunately been cases throughout history, Holocaust being an era where that came up, but maybe others, where a woman did remarry and found out later her husband was alive, even though there seemed to be very strong evidence that he died. So, it's and maybe it was a case of they found a body with dog tags. And the dog tags were someone's, and they said, "Oh, he died. Take a look. You see, there was dog tags around his neck," and they relied on that. Maybe I'm just saying, there's a possibility that was a simon. He had his dog tags on. Who gives away his dog tags? Terrence is. That's why these cases are so sensitive today, especially as well, is because and again, maybe today with technology and our advanced system, maybe l'chara, you would think it might make it a little bit easier to come to a conclusion as to who a person is if there is that child. But in any event, so that's where we are. Mitzvah Shem, we'll pick up next week. And everybody have a great week.
Thank you.